Hi, this is the video for Daf Daled of Masechet Ketubot. Most of this daf, almost the entire daf, is all about mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. And it's very interesting to have a long sugya about mourning right in the middle of the first parak of Ketubot that is all about the wedding. And this is not the only time this is going to happen. It will happen later on Daf Chet, when we talk about what we call the Sheva Brachot, the wedding blessings. We're also going to have a long discussion of blessings recited during mourning or at the funeral. And it's clearly not by accident that the sages, the Talmudic editors, weaved together mourning and wedding discussions. There are many, many parallels between Jewish mourning practices and Jewish wedding practices. The versions of the blessings that are recited are all very similar. The 7 days of observance, 7 days of a feast, of a wedding feast, or the Shiv'ah, the 7 days of mourning, have a lot of practices that are parallel. There are halachot that are parallel. For instance, just off the top of my head, do you recite the blessings that were recited in the first day? Do you continue to recite them? In both cases, you do. If there are new faces, panim chadashot, I have an entire book of parallels between wedding and mourning practices. But I didn't want to go into that today. I just thought it was interesting to mention that again. What I did want to go into was a couple brighto that appear on the page. One of them says, Mi shemet chamiv o chamoto, somebody, a man whose father-in-law or mother-in-law died. Eno yachol lachof et ishto liot kochelet, liot pokeset. He can't force his wife to put her makeup on. Ere kofeh, Meitato v'noheg ima avirut. He has to turn over his bed, which is a sign of mourning, and he has to observe mourning practices with her. So if his father-in-law or mother-in-law dies, he has to allow his wife to fully observe her mourning practices, and he should even observe mourning together with her. And the same is true the other way around. V'chein hi shemet chamia o chamota. If her father-in-law or mother-in-law die, she is not allowed to put on her makeup. Rather, she has to turn over her bed and observe mourning with him. Now, this is not the practice anymore. Today, when a person's in-laws die, they do not observe mourning practices with their wives, with their spouses, with their husbands, etc. But in the Talmudic times, clearly this was the practice. And you even have a braita on the same page, a Memra, an Amoraic statement. Damare Rav lechia brei. Rav said to Chia, his son, Rav the Amora, the Babylonian Amora, Ba'apa nahug aviruta. In front of her, keep mourning practices. Not in front of her, you do not have to observe mourning. So you can even see a little bit of a deterioration here in the level of mourning for in-laws. The Braita, basically, the Tannaitic earlier Mishnaic source, seemed to say that just as one would observe mourning for one's own parents, so too one observes mourning for one's father-in-law and mother-in-law. And there is evidence for this in Moed Katan, the tractate that deals with mourning, that one would observe mourning not just for one's immediate 7 relatives, as we do today, but for anybody who's one of the relatives of theirs. In other words, you would keep it for your 7 relatives, and if one of your 7 relatives is mourning for one of their 7 relatives, so you would mourn with them, which would greatly expand the circles of mourners. And the Babylonian story that I just read is a little deterioration because Rav says, look, when you're in front of your wife, then you keep mourning with her, you observe mourning practices with her, because you're respecting her, not because it is your own mourning. But when you are not in front of her, since you yourself are not really in mourning, you do not have to observe mourning. And in post-Talmudic times, this halacha sort of fell by the wayside completely. And today, and in most of the post-Talmudic period, people keep mourning practices only for their own close relatives. Some of this may have to do with the sort of dissolution of this broader family and the advent of what we call today the nuclear family. As the family size, or what perceived to be your immediate family, grew smaller, so the circle of mourning grew smaller as well.